Okay, good morning. This is Ron. It's Sunday morning, a little after 11 a.m., and we'll go ahead and get started today. On yesterday, we had Q&A of most of the day and fielded questions and just kind of had a discussion. So, good place to start again today. Is there anyone who has a question and or comment from yesterday or anything else for that matter? Seemed like there was something we were talking about yesterday at the very end that we sort of ran out of time. Does anyone remember what it was?
Denise had a question.
Okay.
So I
Denise, are you?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to ask if she was on today.
I remember what it was.
Okay.
It was related to something I said about the name Yeshua being a formula or an equation of consciousness, of spirit, and what that meant. Oh, good morning.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, no problem. We were just getting started, but we were talking about your question yesterday, when we ended. Nick was trying to remember what your question was. You want to begin there? Let's be a good place to start our discussion today.
Yes, it sounds like, Nick, that you remembered it because you mentioned that as being a formula, and I was trying to figure out how that was related to Jesus's name, because I know Yeshua is his name. And I mean, maybe this is kind of simple and not particularly esoteric, but I'm trying to figure out if his mother knew that when she named him, or like how does that work?
Good question. Was his name that?
Oh. Okay. Please continue.
What I said yesterday, everyone, is that if you weren't here, that the name Yeshua, as we see it written in the Tree of Life, and as it's written in Hebrew and Aramaic, is a formula or a kind of equation of consciousness, of spirit. And everywhere we see in the Bible that name, particularly in the Old Testament, and variations of that name, Joshua, Yehoshua, that kind of lineage of that name, what you're seeing is the process of balancing the nature of the self. Because as we've always said, the Bible is a spiritual map of you, of all of us. And every sort of incarnation of that name is another step in the process of developing the true aspect of self that Yeshua, or all those names, are in reference to, and that they are vibrating with. So when I say that name is kind of like a formula or an equation of consciousness, it is exactly that. It's a word in a song that makes up the vibration of the total spiritual being that you are, is another way to describe it. And that story of the progression of all the Joshuas, Yehoshuas, etc., throughout the Old Testament is the process, as I said, of each step in the process of balancing the self, but it is during the full tour, so to speak, of the land of Israel within you. So as you move through the different parts of self, or you encounter whatever challenges and trials throughout your life that require you to pull a different part of yourself out of yourself or to the surface, you are sort of touring the land of Israel within. You're visiting or getting to understand each of the 12 tribes within you. And the perfection of that process is in the completeness of Yeshua, is in the perfection of that aspect of self. And that's why we have 12 disciples, male and female, 12 sort of tribes of Israel around the one. Well, the male and female of that as well. Yes, sir.
Let me see if I'm clear. Are you saying that the name Yeshua is actually a, what is it? Not combination, but it includes Yeshua. The energy of Yeshua, of Jesus, includes all of the energy of the 12 tribes rolled into one. And when we understand the vibration, we understand the quote unquote power that's in the consciousness of Jesus. It is then that we are able to become more aware of the combination of energies that we pull from ourselves on a daily basis as we travel this journey in search of truth. Is it something like that?
Yes, sir, I believe so. It sounds exactly like it. Does that make sense to people? Any response to that at this point?
This is Ramel. Good morning.
Morning.
Say, Nick, are you both saying in my mind what I'm seeing in a physical sense, but I mean it not in a physical sense? Is it like each of the names, each of the tribes, their concepts all culminate into Yeshua?
Yes.
So, yeah, and but they also, they don't disappear in
No.
that sense, but they are sort of balanced and ordered by that. And it is the narrow pathway along which they all walk, if that helps.
Say that part again, Nick. They're all.
They are ordered and balanced by Yeshua, which is the perfection of each of those sort of steps, those 12 tribes, those signs of the zodiac, 12 disciples, or male and female, etc. Yeshua is the perfection of all of those things, representing the order and balance, and the thing that orders and balances them, and they all pass through that, or are that is the 12 separate paths converge in what Yeshua is, and then it is in that energy that they all continue forward as a group, if that makes sense. Yeah,
It does. I have another question with that. Now look at the tree of life, I think it is, what we have on the wall, which are the circles. There's one that's circle that sits in the mist, that's dotted. Is that?
Vermeil.
Yes. It's hard when you can't see the picture, right?
Vermeil.
Yes.
If I may.
Yes.
Let's just stick with the conversion of the energies of all of the 12 disciples. The 12 tribes of Israel, being converging there in the name or in the energy of Jesus, and then disperse it from there in terms of the 12 disciples, rather than get into the tree of life, because it's very difficult for
Okay.
others to envision that, when most of them have not seen it at all. Okay?
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was also reminded as you guys are talking, the number 13. Doesn't the number 13 speak of bringing unity to the 12? Isn't that? Does anybody remember that number? It kind of supports what you were saying, I think.
It is the number that ties everything together.
But there is also a 13th sign of the zodiac, right?
Yes.
Yes, and I don't know why I don't hear about that more, but I did a video on this years ago called "The Number 13 and the Christ Consciousness Principle." But that 13th sign, I believe, is Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, which is exactly related to what we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks.
Hey, Nick,
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
isn't it true you can divide the year into 13 months more easily than 12, right? If they're all like 24 months or something.
I think it actually is easier to do 12, which is why we do that, because Ophiuchus is it's very, very, very tiny. But generally, I think there's better ways to organize that calendar, which is why the Jewish calendar is based on is different in some ways than the rest of the European calendar. But yeah, somewhere in there, and I don't know off the top of my head, but there is a better way to organize a lot of how we organize time.
13 months would be 28 days long and one added day of the year. So in essence, every year, maybe Christmas would be 2 days long, was something I'd heard someone say, but I agree on easier ways.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the Jewish calendar. The lunar calendar is 13 months long.
Yeah, it is. It has that extra. Yeah, it does have that extra month. I can't remember it well now, but
yeah, that sort of a tiny little leftover part of time. That is the time of that's Jubilee. That same thing happens after like a bunch of years go by, and then there's just a longer period of that sort of quote unquote leftover time on the calendar. If everyone gets my meaning, that is the point at which you leave the cycle of 12. That's the messianic or Christ consciousness awareness fully activated and in motion.
I wondered about something else while you were talking, the energy of that name. And if you look at all the chaos going on in the world now, there are still the name, nobody named, or nobody says Jesus or Yeshua anymore, but like the Hispanic name, Jesus is spelled as Jesus, and you have names like Joshua and James and John, and that energy then is still prevalent in the world, doing what it does, right? Even amongst the chaos. Is that safe to say?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nick. I want to say something after you finish with that.
Okay. I would say in a way, but you can use any name you want for any purpose you want. It may still have some trace of the original vibration in it, but it can also produce confusion. It just depends on your relationship to it. Yep.
Okay.
That relates to what I was going to say. When we talk about the 12 tribes, culminating in the energy of Jesus and who Jesus is and what Jesus taught, and then it's dispersed through the 12, meaning the disciples, and then it comes to a head again. Where does it come to a head again? It culminates in the energy of a group of people. Let's say that 12 is equal. It's just one group of people is one group, and all 12 of those energies culminate in that group. So it comes together again at the place and time where man makes a clear, conscious decision to be a seeker of the energy of truth and have a deep-seated desire to bring balance to humanity. And so what you actually see is 12 of the tribes culminating in one with Jesus, dispersed from Jesus into the 12 disciples again, culminating again in that group who's made a decision to be searchers of truth. And by doing so, that energy, that journey rather of that energy coming back together, let's say that this group on the phone is the group that this energy concentrates in right now. And it's for the purpose of bringing balance to humanity. Well, when Nick talked about it could bring confusion, well, the confusion is the religious settings that uses that name for its own purposes, and with those who are followers of it who think that name is the one, is simply saying that name is what brings about deliverance, is what brings about balance, is what brings them to a place of one with the one who created them, when in essence it really doesn't. Understanding or seeking to understand what that energy is in that name is the thing that brings about deliverance. And that deliverance that it brings about is not something that frees us from our bodies, as in dying and going to heaven. It frees us from the shackles of the confusion that those who have used this name for their purposes. It frees us from that type of confusion, that religious confusion, or the confusion that we're experiencing in the earth today. And if you really think about yourself individually or collectively, matter, but especially individually, if you think about that, the more you understand about the energy force in Jesus, or that he taught rather, and the energies of the universe, and you understand who you are, the freer you become, and the easier it is to live this life, because you don't have all of those do's and don'ts that you've received from various sources as you live this life. Does that make sense?
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah, it makes sense, but I wanna go back to what Nick said about the 12 disciples, male and female. We don't know of any female disciples except possibly Mary Magdalene. Could you elaborate on that, Nick?
Yes. The sources for that is, I don't even know if there are any, but that is a strong belief of mine that all of the disciples, or at least not most of them, were married. And so the female half of discipleship would have sort of come through their wives in that way. But Mary had herself her own disciples. They likely would have been the wives of the male disciples, but also others, I believe. You cannot have one gender in the transmission of these teachings or the energy that we are speaking about. To artificially limit it to either men or women, way more likely to be artificially limited to men, of course, that is incompatible with spirit. You will get a flawed message. Well, in terms of how it plays out, you will get a confused understanding, leading to what we, are very familiar with in terms of how religion developed from these original spiritual concepts.
Well, even in the society itself, even if you look at it, exoterically, you could not be considered a teacher anyway if you didn't have a wife. So the idea of the teachings being masculine only or coming through a masculine, being delivered in a masculine setting without feminine females would not have been acceptable anyway. So I don't see Jesus or Mary or the rest of them as being individual people, but I do understand clearly that it is impossible to birth a message from a seed unless it has a womb to germinate in. So from that perspective, I see it very clearly.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So who was Sophia? Because wasn't she with Mary and them?
No. So Sophia is simply wisdom, and the one who what was her name? That was Mary Magdalene's companion.
That's who I'm trying to think about. I
Salome.
thought it was Solomon. Yeah, her.
But there
So
were
was she
also,
not? I'm sorry, I yield.
no, I just wanted to throw in that there were also a couple of women in the New Testament who were very, how should I say, they were very prominent in terms of their financial support, and Jesus trusted them to bring the message to. I forget their names.
Well, yes, I know who you talk about too, Audrey. And not only that, Audrey, but if you look at even the writings of Paul, there were very prominent females engaged in the carrying of the word that Jesus taught. What I want, what I'm asking, I guess, suppose, Nick, are we going to take all of this and relate it to where we are today and how it relates to us? I'm trying to think of those names because I think those names, Audrey, will give us a message as to where we are today as well. Or give us an inkling, rather, as to where we are today in reference to them.
Yeah, that sounds good. The next thing I wanted to say was like what we see in certain religious tradition, particularly Catholicism, where the priests are not allowed to marry, that there are spiritual traditions where whoever the teacher is takes a celibacy vow, but that must always be voluntary and something you do individually. And the religious, in this case Catholic, sort of perversion of that concept is the enforcement of celibacy, at least on the surface. That I don't think most of them probably are, but in the upper echelon, so to speak, of the power structure of the Catholic Church, they probably are not. But the point is, forcing that is, for their purposes, a way to enforce the idea that men are above the rest of the congregation or people in the church, of course. And that's very easy to see in the concept of nunnery and being a nun. There are monks and nuns, but monks can advance, nuns do not, that kind of thing. That is a sort of confused reinterpretation of spiritual practice that all of that grew out of, in a way. Any questions?
So is it our responsibility now to be the teachers or the oracles for what Jesus taught in terms of making sure that humanity has opportunity to receive from the energy of deliverance, so that everyone will have opportunity for the eye to be open, thus bringing us to this place of balance. Is this where we are in reference to what we just talked about?
I believe so, with the recognition that that cannot be done without the respect that is owed to femininity and to women. Because wherever that is lacking, particularly in religious settings, you cannot have spiritual growth.
Nick, I think that's evident too. Not just Nick, but all of us are. I think that's prevalent too. When we look at what happened at the cross, why was it necessary? Excuse me. Why was it necessary for Jesus to make the statement, "Son, behold your mother," when he placed his mom into the under the authority of was it Peter? I think. Why was that? Why was that necessary? Was he sending us a message, saying that that the seed was being crucified, but the womb was still available for the seed to procreate in? And I'm not talking about procreation in terms of humans, but I'm talking about the message, the womb that the message actually develops in is left in the earth for that purpose and that purpose alone. And the word cannot reproduce without that womb that was left here for that seed, and that seed being represented by that entity that we see on the cross. Does that make sense?
It does. And also that sounds to me like a admonishment to recognize the authority and the connection to the wisdom that must be maintained, that comes through femininity or comes through the mother. And that was probably what was very quickly rejected.
Right. And the thing that was rejected is actually the source of the strength and power of what we are to utilize, or the substance that we are to utilize for the purpose of bringing understanding to the earth. It appears as though everything that was rejected is the thing that is necessary for us to move forward, being who we were created to be. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Does that make sense to everybody on the phone?
Yeah, I was listening to what you guys are saying, and it reminded me of Isaac taking Rebecca into Sarah's tent. The light of her tent was passed on to his wife, and she became his, the word covering comes to mind, but his protector. And she was the one who surrounds him and protects him. So what you're saying is that womb is not only to prepare new life, it is also the thing that creates space for what am I trying to say? For the growth that they grow into one. That protection is not that protection is more in line with opportunity for you to see who you are and see the uniqueness or the growth or the oneness that when you become one with femininity, what it is gained by it if you are willing to relinquish just your masculinity alone. I guess I'm trying to tie the two things together.
Right.
Yeah, if you could see that, it can kind of help me with it.
Yeah, I see it. Man, see, if we look at the scriptures the way they are written and not the way they are taught, we're taught that, for example, Abraham was a man. That's not it. We're taught every time we see masculine, see a man's name, we're talking about masculine energy or seed. Okay? So if you really think about it and you talk about Sarah, the feminine energy becoming Abraham's covering, then that's simply saying that the seed never leaves the womb because it's covered by femininity. And the problem comes when the masculinity feels like it does not need the protective covering of the womb anymore, and then it stands in a pulpit or it stands behind a podium and denounces the covering of the power of that femininity that covers it. It denounces its protection, and it doesn't do it verbally by saying "I denounce you," but it does it in the way that it treats the representation of femininity, and by virtue of minimizing its presence and minimizing its importance. So if you look at it that way, I see the feminine energy as being the shell, and I see the masculine energy as being the seed within that shell. And the moment that seed sheds that shell, confusion ensues because everything else falls apart. And if you look at that in regards to the way all religions are set up today, then none of them has the protection of that shell because men are the ones who have separated themselves from that shell and put that feminine energy in a place in a place where it's not considered to be needed or important anymore. Does that make sense, Ron?
Yes, sir. It does. Thank you.
I should say, does that make sense to the rest of you guys as well? Can you see that?
I have a question. So
Let me finish with this first, Evelyn, if you may, unless it's on the same thing.
it is on the same basis of what we're talking about.
Okay, go ahead.
So you're saying that the woman, not the woman, the feminine energy covers the male energy?
I am saying it's the womb that covers the seed, yes.
You can think about it in the feminine energy in this case is what gives the seed the direction, what tells it how to grow. And
Right.
without that, it doesn't know what to do, and so it sort of becomes confused.
So that's the nurturing part. When you say the feminine energy covers the male energy, that's the nourishing part that we're talking about, the feminine energy do? Is that one of the roles?
Well, Evelyn, when you think about the Holy Spirit being our covering, the Holy Spirit is feminine energy. So it's like
Correct.
that. It's like that.
And this, spiritually speaking, nourishing, yes. Although that is generally, when we say that, we're usually talking about the more the social or physical aspect of that. But spiritually speaking, that is what it does, because the wisdom that allows for life to flourish, spiritually speaking, is more easily passed or more easily resonates with the feminine. And so it directs the masculine. And that,
And look, I'm sorry, Nick. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
and that is a fundamental spiritual, metaphysical relationship present throughout all of what this physical material creation is. The feminine is the covering, and exactly we've been talking about it, that directs and in some ways protects the masculine, and protects in the sense that it keeps it on course spiritually. When you look at an electrical or electricity traveling through a wire, there is a magnetic field around that electricity. I know, just stay with me for a second. The wire is straight. The magnetic field always is curved around that straight wire. So think about how the magnetic field covers the point of electricity in the middle. If you cut that wire down a cross section, it's that is the physical pattern that models spiritual concept. And as we have talked about in here, this physical material experience is nothing else than spirit made manifest. It is a state of spirit. And I say all that to say you cannot have one without the other and hope to accomplish anything spiritually. So every time you've been in a church setting or wherever, where they have made an effort to minimize the input of women, or to not allow the input of women to govern that place, that place is going to fall apart eventually, spiritually speaking, probably physically as well, in terms of the cohesion of the people who go there, in terms of everything you want out of that experience, which is spiritual, even if you don't know it. But anyway, thank you.
Rick, I think that is what we were experiencing, and I have not really made the connection between what happened during this period of COVID. The reason things fell apart and still are falling apart so rapidly is because there is no feminine direction there, no feminine guidance. And because there is no feminine guidance, there is no order. And order has been something that men have made up as they go. It is nothing that has any value to it at all. It simply has been something to manipulate and dominate. And now that domination and manipulation has been shown for what it really is, there is no substance to hold it together anymore. That makes sense?
Yep. And that's why we get advertisements for Jesus's brand at the Super Bowl.
Yes. Yes. Just like you guys, Calvin Klein, Jesus brand. And that in itself, and when you think about it, it is funny, but then when you think about it, it is also sacrilegious in that you are taking something that is the source of all life, those elements that are the source of all life, and you're minimizing their effectiveness or their importance by commercializing them. And the only reason you're commercializing them is because you want to put bodies in pews, as opposed to putting wisdom or understanding in the hearts of men, so their eye can be open, so all of them can benefit. All of this is simply about not only the branding of Jesus, but the branding of religion itself. And honestly, the Judaism and Buddhism, Judaism and Islam are no different. They do it in a different way, but all of them are the same. Every one of them has removed from it the source of its guidance and have minimized the spiritual nature of life itself. So right now, we are at a raw stage, and what I mean by that is this: we're at a stage where the covering, where the guidance has been stripped away, and now it is in search of some kind of protection, and it doesn't know what it's looking for. However, the protection that is looking for is something that it does not even know exists. And that is why it is so important to maximize what we put in the macro so that that protection, that covering that's familiar to humanity can be embraced by them. When we talk about people being woke, that is simply saying that they are coming in spiritual contact with something that is familiar to them. And that familiarity causes them to pull it closer to them. And as they do that, our guidance and protection is being put back into place where it's supposed to have been all of the time. And by doing that, we move closer to a place where we see the manifestation of the unicity that we desire, or the balance that we desire with humanity. Is that? Can you see what I'm attempting to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would add also that this idea of Christian nationalism is another means by which people are trying to usurp the name and politicize it. You talked about commercializing it, but politicizing it for its own selfish purpose to circle back into those areas of the isms and schisms that we've already put in the macro that are blasted away. So it's trying to this is not a word, but reconcrete those things that have been destroyed in a sense, those spiritual isms and schisms that have been destroyed. So Christian nationalism is a way that people are now trying to retake that again, that power that goes along with it, and to separate rather than unify again.
100%. That is the true monster sort of rearing its head. Its veneer of sort of religious whatever is being pulled away, and that is the actual religion of, generally speaking, white conservatives, and that actual religion is white supremacy. Sort of capitalism and its religious form, which is mostly what Christianity is, are the two, or sort of two subsidiary branches of the head corporation, which is white supremacy. And since they know that their power is fading or whatever, yes, 100%. Christian nationalism is a sort of unmasking of what people of that wavelength wanted in the first place, which has nothing to do with anything taught in the Bible.
And when you speak of that, Nick, I want to add to that also that because of what it is, there is nothing for us to get bent out of shape over or be afraid of. And what I mean by that is this. There is no way that is going to be able to flex its muscles as it has in the past during a period when the known world was ruled by white supremacy. That is not something that should even be a concern of ours now, because once now that we are at a place of understanding, of knowing who we are, but more importantly, understanding the wisdom of the darkness that has surrounded us for so long, the teeth has been taken away from the tiger, and the tiger has also been declawed. So now it only has a roar, and a roar has never hurt anyone. So when you hear about, when you see what's happening, I hear the people like Nikki Haley professing, pushing forward rather this whole white Christian national platform. Don't even be leery about it, because it cannot go anywhere. It has no life. Thank you.
Yep. And I believe that also relates to when we know the verse, sort of in the end times, quote unquote, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. And that is speaking about every end of the cycle, because the same pattern kind of repeats itself. But when we hear about the idea of civil war again in the United States, if anyone pays attention to that kind of news, that is also something that is much more of a roar than anything else. There's no teeth behind that. Violence is of course possible. It will be on a much smaller scale, more sporadic, if any occurs at any point in this transition away from the dying power structure of white supremacy. But full war internally is no, I can't see that happening, just in case anyone had seen those kinds of things mentioned in the news.
Well, the other thing too, I think, is that in terms of people like Nikki Haley and Marjorie Taylor Greene, the stuff they spew is so from a masculine energy point of view that it seems like they've actually lost themselves or their spiritual selves in all of that. So yeah, if it's not true to who they are, it can't live very long.
The whole idea of this idea of civil war had to rear its head again, because this is what slavery culminated in, a civil war, and this is what Christianity led to, a civil war, and Christianity won the war, and it had to recur again in order for it to be brought to an end. Because if we really think about it, history continues to repeat itself until we do something about it, until we correct the course of it. And we are in the process right now of correcting the course of it. So I agree 1,000% with it when he talks about, yes, there will be sporadic violence, but something of a war as has been in the past will never happen. I do not see that at all. Because of the power of righteousness that is so pervasive in the earth right now. And it doesn't take 1,000, doesn't take 1,000,000 righteous people. It only takes one in order for righteousness to prevail. So in order for the for Christian nationalism to be defeated, it has to engage in a type of war. So it can be defeated, because the last time it won. It rolled over everything and encapsulated everything with its tentacles around the earth. Now it's time for us to end that, and that's where we are. And it all reached a crescendo when COVID spreads around the earth. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Pastor.
History.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I yield.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, what I was going to mention, Ron, is that Christian nationalism. This is what have resulted in the conditions leading to cognitive dissonance. Our belief in terms of what we hold as a premise of being true, and as we, come into the truth and the knowledge, the evidence of what we know is written. I think that this is why we go back, to our beginnings, to appreciate doing that comparative analysis, in terms of the beginning, looking at, the African theory, on cosmic consciousness in the universe, because what we were taught, is that untruth, but because of the evidence of what we know is truth, I think we're coming into that awareness to be able to change the mindsets of how we were taught. And so I just wanted to share that thought, because again, what's being put out there in the macro with regards to a truth is not truth, because of what we're able to discern as we continue, on this development. So I just wanted to just share those thoughts, and I thank you for letting me share that.
George, it's interesting you said it that way. But what you're saying is what happened had to happen in order for us to be propelled, in a sense, to seek what we know is truth, because it presented itself in such a way to be so outlandish. Lots of stuff, even what's being spouted out in them, it's so outlandish that we have to seed the macro with truth, so that people, when they hear this, because they know it's outlandish, when they hear this and they begin to take that inward journey, they have something to grasp upon. They have truth. They have the substance, if you will, to begin to heal it. The body, the individual has the substance to begin to heal itself, and it's only because of what's being aligned with what's cosmically true.
Thank you, Barbara.
I was listening to when Nick and Pastor were talking about history repeating itself, and some of the other cycles, even in the cosmos that we've talked about. I don't know if you guys watch CBS this morning with Jane Pauley. I kind of like that show, but I saw a segment this morning. They were talking about the book. I forget the name of it now, and it was right in my mind. All's Quiet on the Western Front, I think is the name of it. But it was a book about war, and I think it was based on World War One. And the reason the writer, the book is very violent, and over the years there have been a number of movies written about based on the book, and the new movie is about to be released now, and they were talking about the violence in the movie, and the reason for it was so that men could be reminded of how war is, and history not repeat itself. And the movie was also so that everybody else could be there. It puts everybody on the front line to see this and to witness and to feel it. And they were talking about how that has failed. The history does repeat itself, and war is in your face, and it's just as deadly and violent and as it ever was. And I'm listening to us talk about this, and maybe the cycle is just what you guys are saying. It is for the seekers of truth that these cycles come about, that we see these events and the history repeating itself, and the inhumane things going on, and the in your face kind of things, so that as George described, that one day somebody just kind of opens his eyes, and it's only one type of man that can do that. So to the rest of everybody that sees it, you feel the injustices are overwhelming, and there's not a whole lot you can do. But there has to be somebody that stands up and says, this keeps happening, so that I can see it. And I didn't see it, and I didn't have the courage maybe in the last generation, but I have it now. And that's where we are now. So I just thought that was interesting that was on this morning. They were talking about that. how history repeats itself and nobody seems to pay attention. They're paying attention and they're just helpless because they don't see the spiritual side of anything.
Or they don't try
Anyway.
Maybe they don't try to correct it. They see it, but they perpetuate it as opposed to correct it.
Yeah.
See, the fear of change, the fear of correction, is found more so in the church than it is anywhere else. People are afraid to leave a congregation that they know is wrong. Why? They're more afraid of leaving a congregation than they are of being shot in the street. That's something to think about. Why? Why would that fear of separating from something that is totally wrong and you know it is? Why is that fear so strong? Could it possibly be that the doctrines of that religion has has pushed so deeply rather inside of you the reality of your essence until you just can't feel it anymore, or you're afraid of what it feels like, and that is one of the reasons when you begin to change, you feel uncomfortable with the change, and you're afraid that you might be making the wrong step because everyone else is still left where you were in terms of in those settings. Could that fear be there because we don't want to lose something? If that is the case, then does it not make sense for us to search ourselves and to deliver ourselves from those articles of fear that's still in us? And I'm not talking about police fear. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that discomfort with putting behind us those things that we say there's nothing to go back to. When in actuality, you never left them. I mean, how can you say there's nothing to go back to when you're still holding on to what you said there's nothing to go back to? So at some point in our lives, don't we have to be true to ourselves and admit the reason that we don't want to completely release ourselves from it is because we're afraid of what may happen, or we're afraid of being totally disconnected or totally excommunicated from those settings. And I think that's a question that everyone has to ask themselves, with the exception of people like Nick and Janice knows, who never really connected themselves to those kinds of settings. But I think that's something to think about. And also, I think that in doing so, we have to also be honest about some other things too. And one in particular is maybe when Barbara was talking about the repeating the history. I can't remember the words you used, Bob, but it made me think about that was the purpose. Maybe that was the purpose for slavery itself, in order to set into motion a movement or a desire for to find oneself that would free the world from this cognitive dissonance, this thing that we call truth that really isn't. Maybe that started prior to, but it's the very thing that brought into existence slavery, so that this earth could become what it was created to be in the beginning. What do you think?
I think so. I think that there are some things because we are not willing to, we meaning humanity, we're not willing to take the initiative as humanity, as mankind, as humankind, to look within ourselves. It's almost like it's been buried in us, that and it's like the veil that has to be stripped away. And it's only those things that challenge us, that force us, if you will, to look at ourselves. That those things that cause us to think about the dark night of our souls. What is it? Whether it's personal, whether it's financial, whether it's economic, whether it's religious, whatever it is that compels us to look at ourselves. It has the opportunity, therefore, to propel us into searching for the genuine us. So every challenge is an opportunity. That's why we can say that. Every challenge is not necessarily there to defeat you. The bigger question is, what is it there to teach me so that I can move forward in understanding the essence of who I am.
And the reason that makes so much sense, I guess, we've talked about this. The African that was brought to the Americas was not only isolated, but he was not allowed to bring anything with him culturally, and I don't mean physical possessions. I mean that his whole mental and cultural beliefs were whitewashed and moved, pushed out, and filled with something else, and so that he has no choice but to go inward to see who he is. And there's nothing external that will remind him of who he is in the state of mind that he's been put in.
You know, Ron, that makes so much sense, because if you strip away all of the cultural, as you were saying, if you look externally, if the African looks externally to find out who it is, he would find out he's nothing. He's nobody. He's less than an animal. He doesn't even exist in the eyes of anyone. He's the invisible man. So the only place where you can find yourself is internally, and that, I think, Ron, that further undergirds the reality that we are indeed a spiritual nation that was born on the waters for the purpose of bringing humanity to a place of deliverance.
Yeah, it all makes sense.
So cognitive dissonance serves as in the same way that we say suffering does, because it is a kind of suffering when your mind is being pulled in two different directions. So it serves that same thing, because suffering makes us do that internal reflection necessary to find ourselves.
I agree with that, Audrey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is intended, but then there needs to be a model. And everyone engaged in this type of spiritual work is intended to be that model, or it is our responsibility to be that model energetically, but also when we have the opportunity to share the same information, or the same vibration, I should say, when we are amongst the people.
Yeah, and also, Nick, and everyone, and what I'm hearing in the spirit, there's a scripture in Romans, I believe it's in chapter 8, that talks about, for the suffering of this present time is not worthy to be compared to the glory that will be revealed to us, in us, and for us. And again, I'm truly, grateful, for this time that we're living in, because it was something that I dearly was searching for in my personal journey, in terms of how the North connects with the South and how we are part of the universe, and the universe is us. And I'm just, so, again, elated and just spiritual awoken in terms of the importance, of our time that we have together and what we're doing, because it's for a divine purpose. And as we continue to search, for truth and significance, I'm just, grateful not just to have read something, that connects me to my history, but to know of situations and lives that some of you have traveled from the South, and how it has impacted on my journey today. So I'm truly grateful and hoping that then we can continue, because all what has been discussed and taught is relevant. And so I just want to thank all of you, just for where I'm at today and who I am, because of those who have gone on before us to give us this enlightenment. So thank you for letting me share again my thoughts and my reflections. I'm done.
But George, you said searching for internal significance. That's extremely important, because that's exactly what we were talking about. There is no significance to us externally, because everything that's external is what CRT is about. It's about creating a world where you see no value in yourself. So significance to us is indeed internal. And I think that there is no longer a search for it within us. We found it. We found that we are significant. We found the road that leads us along this journey that we're destined for. We found the mirror that shows us who we are, and we are weathering the storm and seeing it not so much as a storm, but as an opportunity to be propelled into an area of internal search that shows us the depth of significance that we are to this earth. I remember quite some time ago, years ago, we were sitting there and they made a statement that if the African was taken out of this country, every black person was taken out of this country, it wouldn't last 2 weeks. Or if taken out of this earth, the earth wouldn't last. Why? Because the life of it is found in us. And I'm saying that we have been looking at ourselves as spiritual leadership, but guess what? We are also a buffer. The buffer meaning that if the hatred were not directed towards us, and we being able to withstand it and understand the significance of our being from within, then the whole earth would destroy itself. It would self-implode, because it would turn on itself. And if you think about the violent nature of it, absent us, who would it be violent towards? If we could possibly have been destroyed, none of us would exist in this earth now, because every effort was put forth to do that. I mean, even to the extent that the whole concept is to separate us into small pods and destroy us individually, to the extent that the official policy was expounded, was put out there publicly, actually, by Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski in his white paper, that under no circumstances was the African in diaspora to be connected as one unit to the African on the continent of Africa. And the purpose of that was to keep us separated from each other for the purpose of destruction, for annihilation. So that self-significance says to me that without us, as I was saying many years ago, there would be no existence in this earth. So if you remove the physical bodies, then what you have left is the spiritual life that sustains everything. And now that we see that, we're able to take that and use it for the benefit of those who would self-destruct if it were not for us, those who would destroy us if it were possible. As the scripture says, if it were possible, the very leg would be food. If it were possible, the very life of this earth would be destroyed. But it is not possible because of those who were of that nation that was bred on the waters. Thank you.
How are we feeling, everyone? Questions, comments, anything?
So all of this discussion reminds me of a comment that you made, Nick, about the Osiris principle and Chadwick Boseman. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm trying to understand how that relates to what we're discussing with slavery and white nationalism and how all of that fits together.
Sure. So what I mentioned was, for everybody who wasn't here to catch that, I was relating the death of Chadwick Boseman, the Black Panther actor, to a common pattern that we see repeated sort of throughout history, and that is the death of Osiris, the Egyptian deity. And that sort of spiritual metaphor and metaphysical principle is essentially the death of the father, or the death of the sort of spiritual authority. And then the trials and tribulations that the son, or the in the story, usually the son, as in the prodigal son, but it definitely applies to both men and women, because these are spiritual archetypes we're talking about. But as a result of the death of the spiritual authority, the children, the son or the daughter, has to go through trials and tribulations in order to become themselves the new spiritual authority. But it is not without suffering greatly. But that is the case with all of our lives, as we ourselves go through that same pattern on a individual level, as the earth itself goes through that pattern on a collective level. But it is a part of the hero's journey. It is a part of the formula, the equation that is intended to produce enlightenment. And it is a rough journey in the most in the sense where it is applied the most in the most extreme way, or it is experienced the most extreme way. It does not literally have to be that your father dies and you are left alone to figure yourself out, but that, as I mentioned, is the spiritual archetype. That is the separation from the creator, and we collectively, as the children, must deal with and figure it out and return at the end of that process. So the death of Osiris in Egyptian mythology is a retelling of this spiritual metaphysical principle, and Black people being connected most instinctually and sort of most strongly in a natural sense to spirit, and in particular Black men being representative of that authority in different eras of history, are sort of stereotypically killed off, as we see in all kinds of movies. And I believe that same thing plays out physically from time to time as well. So when we see Chadwick Boseman dying, a great symbol of the essentially spiritual authority of Africans, and not just men, but being representative of Africans in general, dying to something here physically, it's too much a recreation of that archetype for me to ignore it. But that's what I was talking about.
As you mentioned, it wasn't really like this makes space for, 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 for Caucasians to get it right, for that type of attitude, I guess, to evolve and achieve enlightenment, right?
I mentioned that's what sort of in the terms of eras of history where we talk about, like we talk about the zodiac or the moving into the Aquarian age, coming out of the age of Pisces, that kind of thing. In different eras of history, there are sort of different overall general mentalities that dominate in the earth. And the era of history that allowed for the rise of Europeans was one when spirituality was on the decline. And so that would represent the destruction of the African continent, essentially. And this was not only represented in the last a few hundred years, which is when this sort of Europe ascended, quote unquote, but the process is many thousands of years long. The period where Europeans dominate the earth is actually very short in terms of the true length of these great ages, these spiritual seasons of humanity. Europeans being dominant is representative. Well, I shouldn't say Europeans. I should say the confusion that is represented or expressed in white supremacy. That confusion is only dominant for a relatively short time. That confusion represents the sort of disease expressing itself. Like when you get sick, you were sick, or when you feel the symptoms of the sickness, it was already present in you for days or weeks before that. It was just building to the point where the body began to sort of address it openly because it was getting too destructive, that kind of thing. So the point at which it presents itself is a part of the process of healing it. So the spiritual decline or the spiritual power of the African in decline is what allows for the confusion and the disease, essentially, that we see represented in, probably best represented in the kinds of thought produced by some Europeans who have power over the rest of the Europeans. And when it is presented, it can be addressed. And once it is addressed, your body builds immunity to it and it doesn't happen again. Does that make sense?
It does. That is a really, really good metaphor, and I appreciate the explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. All spiritual metaphors and archetypes can be found in the functioning of the physical body. It is true on many levels when it is said in ancient spiritual traditions that the universe is present within you. It is as it says in the Kabbalion and various metaphysical, spiritual, sort of ancient books, the functions or the metaphysics of spirit, just the way it behaves, are represented at all levels. So if you can understand what goes on within you physically, it is itself a spiritual metaphor. And you can extrapolate to understand how these greater forces, quote unquote, work on a larger scale, because it's the same principles at work. The same principles that produce the macro produce the micro, and there is a thread connecting all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Where are we, guys? Questions, comments?
Lot to chew on.
What'd you say, Denise? You have something?
Oh, just that it's a lot to chew on, to think about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. That's why it might be a good place to pause here. Pastor, were you about to say something? I'm sorry.
No, we're good.
Okay. Great discussion, guys.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Nick.
add one last thing. So just to finish that metaphor of the disease coming to the surface as a result of the decline of the health of the body, and relating that to the metaphor of the death of Osiris and the decline of sort of African spiritual authority, disease still has the possibility to destroy the body before healing takes place. But like we've said in here many times before, like I've said many times before, I don't think that's going to happen. I believe we make it out of this grand era, this cycle that we are in, and we progress to having an immune response in terms of the body of the earth and our collective ability to spiritually guard ourselves to these kinds of destructive things happening again. Though we are still in the beginning stages of this process, which is why the full disease has not yet fully expressed itself in terms of running its course in that way. What we see in this desire to push for Christian nationalism, I believe, is the end. That is the full extent of the running of the course of the disease that has lasted centuries. Well, longer than that, but in terms of the sort of European role of in this era of history. But anyway, we will constantly be on the lookout for those signs of the times that indicate where we are as we move forward.
So
Okay.
as we continuously inoculate ourselves and humanity with truth, just because it looks like nothing is happening doesn't mean we're not building up the immunity that we need with the inoculation. So is what I heard you say.
Yeah,
Right.
I like that.
And we will see things happening more obviously that are the immune response to this. But my point is, I believe we make it. We'll see how it goes until then. We'll see how it plays out, rather.
Amen. I like that. Good conclusion, Nick. Thank you. Well, any other questions or comments before we close? Anything to grab our attention before we pause for today?
Good, sir.
Yeah, very, very good session. Please hold your questions then, maybe jot them down and we'll begin there tomorrow. Well, maybe answers what we can tomorrow. If not, we'll do it Saturday, but we'll get to your questions either way. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day and look forward to seeing y'all tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.